All right, let's get started. Welcome everyone to the first CyLab seminar of the academic year. And before we get started, just a couple of reminders. We broadcast and record these out for CyLab seminars. And what we do is, so for this, we encourage your questions, so please ask your questions. If you have a question, please press and hold the microphone button in front of you so that our audience and our partners can hear you. So today we are welcoming back Michael Susong for his talk titled A Primer on Cyber Threat Intelligence. Michael has 3 decades as an intelligence professional in both government service and industry, private industry. He distinguished himself as a former CI operations officer and served in combat on 3 continents as an Army major. Mike has a master's degree in strategic intelligence from the Defense Intelligence Agency and was awarded the CIA's Intelligence Star for heroism in the field. In the private sector, Mike created competitive intelligence programs for Fujitsu and Ernst & Young and co-founded the cybersecurity company iSight Partners. He went on to establish the industry's first cyber threat intelligence program at Pacific Gas and Electric, and most recently has been at Visa. So please join me in welcoming Mike back to CyLab.
There, I mastered the hard part of the presentation, got the mic turned on. Everybody hear me? Good. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you guys today, and definitely want to encourage questions while I'm speaking and certainly afterwards. As I always promise with any presentation, since usually someone makes note that I work for the CIA, I at least guarantee you one war story after the presentation. So at least hold to that. After the presentation, exactly. Today I want to have a chance to talk with you about cyber threat intelligence. As a discipline, intelligence obviously has been around, well, for quite some time in some form or fashion, but within the enterprise and certainly within information technology security, it's kind of just now coming into its own. So I'll kind of give some background as we talk about that. I call it buzzword bingo. You know, go a few years back, it was cloud or virtualization or mobile, whatever it may be. There's always kind of a trend. And if you're like me, anytime the trend comes about and the phrase starts to get overworked, you kind of look at it askance and say, well, is it really or what is it really? So we want to kind of put some framework around, at least my definition, one person's opinion on threat intelligence and how it can be applied, and how it can very successfully be applied in the enterprise or within the network. But again, people are familiar with TACS, TAXI, STIX, CyBox, a MITRE Corporation initiative to kind of come up with a common threat language. We've been involved with that on establishing kind of what those terminologies are, and so how that information can flow machine to machine, and at the same time make sure that it's human readable. And that's kind of one of my concerns is coming from the human intelligence side. I'm a very modest technologist. I'm sure there's a lot more expertise in the room than myself, but a lot of times the translation, especially within the enterprise, working in a commercial environment, is translating that threat or that concern to the business leaders, to the leadership of the company, the ones that write the checks, so that they can understand really what the threat is and what they need to do to make sure they conduct business, but at the same time they reduce their exposure on the enterprise side. I'm going to step to this side. I can read a little better if you guys will allow that. There we go. To that point I just made on justifying the return on investment on cyber investments. Is anybody familiar with the security stack that you can put in place for firewalls, for proxies, for you just named the whole list of companies and products that are out there. All good products by and large, but when you keep putting these investments in and you're still getting breached, you're still don't have good situational awareness of what is touching your network or what's moving inside your network, logically, somebody at the end of the year is going to say, what did we get for all this money? So one of the themes that we've discovered as we work in this environment is, it's like in the early days of the internet, content was king. Everybody had a website, everybody had something up, but it was of no value. So it was what's inside that really drives the draw and drives the value to the network. So we were discovering that cyber intelligence, and I'll go into a lot more detail in a bit, is what kind of is the content within all these the operations. Increasing attack surface. A big part of what good intelligence does is help the attack surface management team or the attack surface mitigation team in an enterprise know where their priorities are. I don't know of an enterprise that's patched everything. I don't know if that day will ever come. So where do you put your resources? What are your priorities? Especially with a lot of enterprises, if you're in the financial sector or other sectors, you can't take something offline. You generate revenue by the network being up and the connections being made. So if you do have to patch, sometimes you have to make a very strong case to even touch those parts of the network. And good intelligence, explaining what the exposure is, what the capability of those threat actors are, why they've 2 months ago breached a company that was very similar to ours, why we have to make this patch and make it now is part of your argument. And you make that with intelligence. You make that with a good business argument. Apologize for stepping in front of the slide so I can see them as well. I mentioned about the protection investments and no real prioritization filters. When you work in the Security Operations Center, depends on, no matter how well they're run, you get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of events. Which event is the most important one? Which one do you call your attention to? Which event may need to be looked at by your incident response team and may be called as an incident? Something's really there that you need to investigate within the company. If you don't have any correlation with any other data, it's just one more blinking red light, and you try to flip that one off and go to the next one. Certainly there's been many cases in the real world on the enterprise side where the company was aware of the breach. They were aware of the event within their security stack that clearly said something's going to miss. Someone's in the network. There's a call out to an IP address that we should be concerned about. But in all the noise, nobody looked at it, or nobody had the opportunity to take a look at it. So if you can prioritize, if you know which one of those red lights when it comes on, so to speak, is the one you need to pay attention to, that's where you get the value from intelligence. Last one on brain dead security tools. I use the analogy, company gets a new tool within their network. It's going to be the panacea. It's going to detect all malware that touches the network. The vendor comes in, they rack it, they stack it, they get a green light, everybody high fives and go to happy hour. That's the last time anybody writes a signature, looks at it, checks the policy on it, or writes a policy on it. And in some ways, maybe that's worse than no tool, because you've been lured into a false sense of security that, oh, well, it'll tell us when something happens. Well, it's like with most things, you have to update the signatures, YAR rules. Do you need regular expressions if it's a proxy? Something to tell these machines what to look for and how to look for it within your network. So again, as we talk, that's the tactical level, the tactical intelligence that you want to make sure you're feeding into your security stack to make it smart. When you look at the threat environment, probably won't be news to some or those who keep up with the groups. Obviously, it's global. I mean, we're all virtually co-located at any one time, and that's not news to anybody. But just as it's convenient for us to conduct business, it's convenient for the threat actors to do the same. You see a lot of, you see different motivations. If you kind of run the clock back a year and a half, DDoS kind of denial of service operations were kind of like just a nuisance. Somebody messes up a website, somebody tries to make a minor protest. When you saw the Qassam cyber fighters, when you saw them really focus on banking and the banking institutions, it really kind of came into its own. You saw a lot more sophistication of the tool. It became a real concern to businesses. It had a potential for some real impact. So DDoS has kind of revived itself as a capability. Cybercrime, obviously the objective is just to steal anything that could be monetized, whether it's information, intellectual property. Credit cards are always the one that we all are most aware of, but anything that could be monetized. And cyber espionage. Broadly defining espionage as any group looking to acquire information about how a company or a nation works, or to obtain intellectual property so that they can either have a competitive advantage or a strategic advantage. Low barrier to entry. I said that, the good news is I'll make sure I see all the Macs, all the Apple machines up here. So this is heresy, but Microsoft is ubiquitous, and networking systems are synonymous anywhere in the world. So again, the good news about being able to communicate across cultures and across barriers and across languages also aids the threat actors. It's just as frictionless for them to operate across one country or one border as another. Trying to see, there we go. Actionable intelligence. That term is another one of the buzzwords that gets thrown around a lot when you're starting to get the marketing messages from vendors and consultants about the intelligence within the cyberspace. It's a pretty simple definition. What can I do? You tell me something, what can I do with it? Can I patch? Can I update my policy on my DLP, a data loss prevention policy? Can I make a business decision based on this? If it's not actionable intelligence, it's news, it's history. It does no value. And the quickest way for a cyber intelligence program and an enterprise to get unfunded is for you to keep telling the business leaders old news, or they can't do anything with it. Or, again, kind of one of my soapboxes is you explain it in such excruciating technical detail that only the guy who said it and maybe the one other guy who works in the same department of his understands what you've just explained to the business. Again, I'm on my soapbox on this regard. You're not dumbing down the explanations. You're not dumbing down the technical explanation. You're making it relevant to the business or to the enterprise that you're with. It's really important to do that. When I've trained analysts and they work within enterprises, I tell them it's the 20-80 rule. Tell the business leader, tell her the 20% that she needs to know to make a business decision, to lower her risk, to mitigate the risk. The 80% is then if she turns to her CIO or someone else in the organization, and then you need to have a conversation with them, okay, what do we need to do? Does that impact us connecting this new acquisition we made in Asia into our network, or in Eastern Europe to our home in Europe, in Western Europe? Does that have some impact? Let's have that discussion on the details about what we need to do to make sure that's a safe connection. But again, that's business impact. That's probably also one of the more difficult skills when we have the analysts work in that environment, is knowing the business. They know the technologies. We have extremely bright people on the team. They're very conscientious and heads down on defending the network, but knowing why this matters to the business. As I mentioned before about patching, it may be obvious to them that this set of servers need to be patched or this part of the network needs to be secured. Certainly if we're coming into the holiday season in retail, pretty much the 1st of November, in most cases, the network doesn't get touched because that's how revenue's generated. Again, that's how business, that's why they call it Black Friday. They term, on the accounting ledgers, you term profitable the weekend of Thanksgiving. So it's critically important that those parts of the network not be touched. So if you have to make that decision, you need to make a good argument to the company. At kind of the operational level, again, that's where you have deliver to the intelligence to the CIO, the CISO, and explain to him and her, okay, here's what we need to do. We need to watch for these kind of call-outs. We need to have a conversation with our internet service providers, our web hosters. A lot of companies have 700, 800 websites that are part of a corporation, and as we all know, any way in could be a way into the network. So you have to make sure all of those are secure as well. And at the tactical level, as I just mentioned, if you have an IP address and you need to block it, or you need to monitor it, or you have other signatures that you need to write a snort signature to look for something, or a YAR rule to make sure you're protected, those are the tactical decisions that you make. There we go. Won't go into every point of this, but I do make the point that cyber intelligence is based on sound intelligence tradecraft. It's what, if you worked in a government position and you were an intelligence analyst or worked in the intelligence community, all these points would be familiar. You would talk in the same terminology that you find people in cyber intelligence in the enterprise side talking in, and it's the intelligence cycle. And again, I won't go through all the points, but the first point, and I will expand down a little bit on intelligence requirements, on what you ask your business leaders so that you know what to focus on. I only use this slide because it transitions so well. I just said so, but it is a cycle. You ask the leadership what's most important to them. You then turn within your own resources, and we'll talk about what resources you have available to collect intelligence. Your analysts then, again, based on those priorities, know what to focus on. You have a written or a electronic dissemination cycle, and then the process continues again. Any questions so far? Anything top of mind? Somebody's got to ask a question. Good. Yes, sir.
So, in my experience, when you talk with people who own missions or business processes, depending, they're not government, they usually are many times unable to articulate a security requirement. They are able to articulate mission requirements, and you have to use they can identify mission requirements, but frequently that's security environments, and you frequently, at least I found, it has to be a prolonged discussion as to what it is that they need to, in the context of security. I'm curious what your experience or recommendations are there.
Good question. I think it leads in the next slide if I've got them in the right order. Yeah. On intelligence requirements, I'll step over here again. I'm trying to read as I see. On a strategic question, like I say, you can have the security conversation, but in the C-suite, in the CEO, CIO, CSO suite, I start that conversation, as you say, and it is a conversation. It's not, all these concerns are not fully formed and they change. Literally what keeps you up at night? And well, the second point is, what news stories or business events seem to be their hot buttons? The CEO's on the treadmill that morning and he sees something on the news and he comes in and that's the crisis of the day, or that's the concern of the day. Part of that conversation, since he's started that conversation with you, is to engage him, say, hypothetically, a peer company to us was breached yesterday by a group out of country X. That's the start of the conversation. And usually the conversation is, are we secure? Are we safe? Usually then what you want to have is, hopefully you're ahead of the curve, but if you're not, quickly you come back to them and say, here's what we understand happened with that peer. They had just made a new acquisition. They didn't really do their diligence on connecting a new part of the network. It wasn't the country that part of the network was located in, but they had some exposures and some compromises, and so it became the back door into our network. So you have that conversation with them, and then of course the rest of your response is, unlike us, here's our policy and here's our process when we connect new parts of the network, or here's our priorities in the SOC, what they're looking for. And so you kind of defend what you're doing with the intelligence that you've collected. Does that, in a way, address it?
Partly. So take your Black Friday example.
Sure.
When you talk with the business owner, what's important? What keeps them up at night? Will I be able to handle the load? Is the coupons that I'm about to send out going to generate the extra demand that I expected or not? And can I find that out right away? It's never expressed in, will someone with a mobile phone walk into the store and jam all my point of sale devices?
And having that conversation with the C-suite is an informal metric that they've bought into the concept of the threat intelligence. Even if you don't call it threat intelligence, you will find at some point they understand what that is, however they want to characterize it, business risk discussions or whatever. But those are all the points you want to make with them. When we talk about intelligence products and intelligence deliverables that you want to have in the enterprise, and all these deliverables and all the intelligence that's generated is done so with kind of what I would call a mixed team of people who maybe have intelligence analyst background, arguably most of the time out of the government sector, paired with or someone who then also has an information technology background, all the better an IT security background, because you have to have a foot in both worlds. You can have somebody who is a geopolitical analyst come into an enterprise and they're lost and they don't understand the network, they don't understand the priorities, or that there is a wireless dimension maybe to a POS system, or even what a POS system is, and how it homes back to the database. So you have to have both those skill sets, or you pair those skill sets together, where you have someone who knows the analytical process and knows kind of how to have that business conversation with the leadership, and then draw out the kind of questions that they're concerned about. Those questions become, I'm kind of skipping to the bottom. Those questions become your priority intelligence requirements, and we'll talk through those as well. That's what drives, that drives your patch cycle. Okay, we're concerned about a group out of country X using a malware variant of black POS to get into our enterprise. That sensitizes the SOC. That you talk to your security operations team, you make sure the signatures are up to date, that everything is patched, that you're concerned about if they're using an exploit that uses a vulnerability that you haven't gotten around to patching yet. It drives very much of the security process. So using the Qassam cyber fighters as the example, will the Qassam cyber fighters target us? That's what your CEO asks. He doesn't need to know kind of how they do a denial of service. He doesn't know really what their technical skills are. He doesn't, in one sense, even need to know how our network's configured. He asks that question. And so that becomes the operational question. What does a targeted DDoS attack look like? If you're being targeted or you're being attacked, do you even know it? What does the SOC see? What sensors do you have deployed in your security operations center to kind of your point, if it's Black Friday and you're expecting all this traffic, is that good traffic? And if it's good traffic, the last thing you want to do is start blocking parts of your network, because again, most cases that translates to dollars or euros every time you block or diminish the customer's ability to conduct a transaction. So what does it look like? That's where the intelligence team comes in and sits down with the SOC, sits down with the Security Operations Center, the CISO, and quite logically the CIO, and says, we're using this example, the Qassam cyber fighters. Here's how they operate. In the past, and this is obviously from the news as well, they tended to operate Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday of the week in the West. Kind of between normal U.S. business hours. Now, obviously, there's reason to do that, because hopefully that's when they want to have the most impact. But it tended not to be Monday, and it tended not to be Friday. And it tended to be certain banks of certain size and they use certain tools when they would attempt to do their denial of service attack. So when you can sit down with your C-suite, and especially the security operations team, and explain that to them, then it's not just one more fire drill, because normally until you sit down and explain that to them, usually the drill is they have a buddy who works at Bank A who gets hit that day. And so then we're like, well, should we be concerned? Are we going to get hit tomorrow? You start then to explain, okay, he called me and they think they're being attacked on Monday. Well, gee, that's kind of out of the norm with these guys. Before we panic, and before we go to a higher state of readiness on the operations center, let's get a few more details. And then it finds out, no, that was just an aberration. They had something misconfigured pointing back, and they were DDoSing themselves. So then you begin then your SOC can drop their operational focus on the other days, not turn it off, and then they know, okay, Tuesday's coming up, let's make sure we're a little more alert. Talk to the intel team. Have we seen any change of tactics? With the COSAM cyber fighters, you actually saw what you could argue maybe was a B team after they had been conducting operations month after month after month. That takes manpower and cycles. It looked like maybe if there was a primary target, Bank A, but they also wanted to start to harass Bank B, they would kind of bring in the B team. Maybe the tools weren't as sophisticated, or they didn't just seem to be as capable of responding after the bank started to shore up its defenses. They kind of ceased work. So then that's another thing. So then when the next week comes by and you are a target of one of the threat actor groups, and you can begin to gauge kind of how they're reacting to you, it gives you intelligence on, well, what do we need to do? The B team's facing us today. We need to be secure and be conscientious about this, but this is not a threat that we're going to have to be concerned about impacting business on a daily basis. This gives you some context. Again, I mentioned what are the technical capabilities of the group. What tools do they use? How do they deploy them? When you raise your defenses, when you start to mitigate some of the effect, what do they do? What do they switch to? How do they change tactics? Do they go back into a reconnaissance role? So then you need to maybe look for things touching different parts of the edge of your network. When you tell your security team this, it gives them, it completely changes the scenario. Instead of just waiting for the next punch, which unfortunately is what happens a lot of time, you can be proactive. You can prepare for what your threat may be. Also, good intelligence in this scenario, and with others, even if you're not a bank. We've had these conversations with companies. During the COSAM cyber fighter campaign, a lot of conversations with other enterprises were, but what if we were a bank, in the sense that this threat actor group decided to come after us? How safe would we be? How defended are we now? So you sit down with the intelligence on, here's the group, here's how they operate, here's the cycle they work on, here's capabilities that really seem to stump them. If you have these things in place, they just don't seem to have a workaround to those. With companies like that, you can have a half-a-day exercise, like a war game. You pretend that you're the target of this group, and they would use these tools. You have a few people on your team take the role of the adversary, and you have the rest of your network prepared to defend, and you go through a war game. And that's a no-cost attack, and you can look at how well you did, what you need to shore up. Almost without exception, companies will come back and say, yeah, there's some, we kind of thought we kind of thought our firewall policy was good, or our scrubbers would handle this kind of traffic, and they didn't. So, without anybody's egos being crushed or anybody losing their job, you could say, okay, we need to fix these now, because if it happens, if they turn their attentions to us and it's during holiday season, the consequences are far more dire from a business point of view. So that's another way you'll use intelligence. And again, the intelligence team within your organization, within your IT organization, could be just a few folks. These aren't massive 50 person teams, because as we talk later, you're going to use outside resources, talk to your peers. There's good sharing communities. We'll talk to those as well, that share intelligence, share information that's actionable to defend yourself. Again, tactical questions, I alluded to this earlier. Which of these 100 events should I examine first? That if you get an event in your logs and you have no correlation to anything else, okay, I'll look at that one just because it's the first one at the top of the queue. But if you then can correlate it with, you have a database of bad IP addresses, and I'll explain what a bad IP address really is. I'll look at that one first. At least you have some context around it. Otherwise, trust me, it's mind-numbing to sit in a SOC and try to defend the network and really have no frame of reference on how to do that. So the questions become divided into answerable parts, as I mentioned. What is the pattern of who is attacked by Qassam cyber fighters? As I mentioned, as we looked at that group, I was working with a company that wasn't a financial company, but as I said, we were watching this very closely to see what was happening and what we should do if a similar event was directed towards us. So we looked at the pattern, days of the weeks, tools they used. What would they do if the next week when they attacked that bank the second time that they had shored their defenses up, how did the threat actors respond? How did they change their tactics? So all that's very valuable. And how does the campaign unfold step by step? How do they pick targets? After a while, we begin to see a pattern, and with some certainty, you could begin to say, well, it's going to be one of these 5 banks will probably be one of the new targets this week for Qassam cyber fighters. Another axiom of the intelligence business is you can be wrong, you just don't want to be surprised. You can be wrong by a matter of degree that it's one of those 5 banks and you miss the bank that you think it is, but at least you know it's those 5 banks or it is a Western bank and the attack is going to happen on Tuesday. You can adjust, but you certainly don't want to be caught flat-footed in this situation. The collection management plan, I won't go into a lot of detail, but then what that is, as I said, if you know you're concerned about this threat actor group and you know they target banks, how do we know what tools they're using, what malware is their preferred weapon? So you start to then find resources either with yourself or with your peers that you can answer that question. Commonly, as we talked about buzzwords, within cyber threat intelligence, you'll hear the expression threat feeds. There's nothing wrong with a threat feed. And my definition of a threat feed is the machine-to-machine readable indications of compromise, an IP address, the threat actor group, the tools they use, a vulnerability that's being exploited. Those are feeds, and in that sense, that's a healthy definition because that's what goes into your SOC. Maybe you have a script and you write a snort signature for your sensors, and then once you kind of do a human verification, you initiate it to block. I would advise against letting the machines make those decisions because, again, there's enterprise and business decisions you need to make sure you're not impeding. But cyber threat intelligence, as opposed to a threat feed, if you will, looks at the actor group. This is Game Over Zeus, the guys who wrote Game Over Zeus, which is a banking malware. Is this a new variant? Is it hard-coded against a certain bank, or is it hard-coded to take advantage of a vulnerability that we patched a month ago, and so we don't really have to be concerned about it? The motivations, why are they looking at our network? Sometimes you have a conversation with a company and they're, in broad strokes, are not sure why they would be interested in them or that part of their network. Maybe they don't think, well, we don't have anything that really could be monetized quickly. We don't have personal information. We don't have customer credit card information. But they may be a very formidable a company that generates a lot of intellectual property, maybe in new areas that they don't even make the connection with, that it's valuable intellectual property. Could be, or if it's like the defense industrial base from a national security point of view, it may be about a weapon system. It could just be about business in a certain part of the world. So there's always information that you maybe are not sensitive to that's a motivation in the group. Primary target, ability to execute. Back to using the example, the CEO comes in and she's excited about something she heard on the news that morning about a group. And probably the best and the worst example are the hacktivist groups and those that under some rubric or the others affiliated with Anonymous, being just an amorphous collection, but some reporter on the news mentions Anonymous and they've targeted company X because of their policy on whatever. And the executives are all concerned about that. The first good intelligence you provide back to them is, we've done our research, the group that is claiming to plan this attack, we've seen them claim to want to attack another company 3 months ago and 6 months ago and a year ago. We've done our research. We've looked at those past attacks. It's actually two guys with a busted laptop, and they try to send out tweets and try to get people to download the high orbit ion cannon and join the mass attack against Company X. Not that they should be ignored, but they are not a viable threat to us. When you can have that conversation with the leadership of the company, that's cyber threat intelligence. That's putting this all back in perspective. In the intelligence community, you always look at any threat actor from intentions and capabilities. Their intentions is to take down the company. Their capabilities, they can't hardly get out of each other's way. So you put that into perspective. When you have that conversation as the intelligence team leader with the executives, you've started a cycle of trust, and you've started to help them understand the threat environment out there. It's not an enviable position to be in as a leadership of a company anywhere in the U.S. or the world and be concerned about cyber threats. You've got a board of directors who are accomplished business leaders who know their trade, who are very well experienced, and the cyber dimension of this it kind of comes at them from left field. So to be able to explain in business terms or in terms that make sense to the business what they're facing is probably the single best way to prove your value and the single best way to bring value back to the company. Again, I seem to climb up on my soapbox a lot here, so bear with me. Another example, when you talk to the threat analyst teams and they kind of moan the fact that, well, we're going to have to dumb this down for the business leaders. And I take exception to that, because they're not dumbing it down, they're explaining it in business terms. It's what will really make a difference so the business can make a decision. Supposedly Einstein made the comment that if you can't explain a concept to your grandmother, you don't have sufficient grasp of it to be able to explain it in terms that anybody would understand. So that's what I always reinforce with the team is, you've got to make sure it makes business sense. So we look at lures. How are they, a spear phishing campaign, just a generic phishing campaign? Are they whaling? Are they going after particular executives within the company? You see that on occasion is two executives in a company get an email. It's well written. It seems to be legit. By all indications, it was targeted. One of the first things you want to ask is, as you kind of dissect the attachment and see what kind of payload it has and how it would execute, is what do those two executives have in common? Are they mergers and acquisition? Are they in charge of financial transactions, intellectual property? What is it? And again, this is what the intelligence team would do, or that part of your security team that has that responsibility. Otherwise, it's just kind of random. You don't really know what to focus on. So it makes a lot of difference. And so we kind of talk through all those others as well. Anybody have any questions or comments? We're all good, huh? Yes, sir.
So one of the things that seems to not have much value anymore is protecting intellectual property. And in this country, at least, the main way to protect your intellectual property is not that it gets out, but that once somebody goes and tries to use it, you can make money off of them in the legal system. But then what about when your intellectual property goes to other countries? You open an engineering facility in India and put it all out there where it's not uncommon for somebody to take a flash drive, you just take it with them across the street to a new job. So how do you start protecting intellectual property in this global environment where that kind of action is not uncommon?
Good question. A little broader than the cyber threat intelligence, but it certainly has areas that it touches. Any global company, no matter where they're based and where they may have satellite facilities, has the same kind of health and hygiene obligations that any employee, if you have an insider employee who's going to take some information, or you have a vendor business relationship and you want to make sure that they don't take information they shouldn't have, or that if they do have that information and conduct business, they're doing so in a responsible manner. It comes back to, I use the term health and hygiene, is, do you have a data loss prevention policy and the technology tools to monitor that through that policy? Do you know where all your intellectual property is? Logically, do you know where it is? And have you prioritized what that intellectual property is? I'm completely speaking out of my element as far as from a legal point of view or a protection point of view, but part of any company's responsibility, if they say, oh, somebody stole this piece of intellectual property, one of the first questions back is, what did you do to protect it? Why do you consider it valuable intellectual property? Again, where is it? What is your diligence to protect it? So again, I'm kind of getting off our topic, but the point is those same security tools that you're using to defend the network are going to be what gives you situational awareness about where your information is and how it's being used. It has to move. Obviously, the beauty of the network is the information moves hopefully in a frictionless way to conduct business. You just don't want to slip out, want it to slip out the end of the pipe, so to speak. Help a little bit? Maybe different topic or something I can follow up afterwards. I'll be glad to do so. Anybody else have a question? Yes, sir?
One of the things that I've noticed just being in the world, I guess, too, is that usually C-level executives are more willing to spend on tools rather than on people. And instead, how you were saying how there's like a tool of the day kind of thing where it's just, okay, we just put this in and we're done. We can set it and forget it. And they don't have enough people that actually will monitor that tool and will write those signatures. In fact, they usually just say the tool is going to be the long-term solution at this point. Let's not bother hiring at least 2 to 3 people and set people up to look at these things. So how do you even convince the C-level executives to instead, when you show them the problem, of course, they see the tool in the news or, they're marketed really well, and instead they just, they don't realize that the human element is also important.
The best question of the day so far, as that's a concern with mine, is all the tools are potentially good. And that's a whole other conversation about how you layer a defense, and really, do you have things that are watching the same thing and you have big gaps over on the other side? Is when you begin a good cyber threat intelligence program with one person, 2 people, whatever, or using maybe initially a vendor partner. I think every enterprise knows their enterprise best, and at the end of the day, they're the ones that really should own that intelligence. It's kind of someone's ox will get gored in the process, but one of the first steps usually is, if you kind of get a freebie here, is we put that security tool in. When was the last time the signatures were updated? How frequently do you update? And then you start getting to the conversation with security ops is, well, we update on the 3rd of the month. So I guess for the month, we're exposed, to this threat until we update on the 3rd of the month. So when you go to the security ops team and when you go to the leadership, the C-suite, and say, we can't wait for the 3rd of the month because the Qassam Cyber Fighters, the group I keep referring to, just as an example, attacks Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, and today's Friday, so we've got about 4 days till, and oh, and by the way, we're a bank, and oh, by the way, by our analysis, we seem to be next on the queue here. Then you start to be able to have that conversation with the leadership. And again, the intel function, they're vendors, and there's sharing, and there's information that you can access without big expenses, but it does take somebody who focuses on just that. So it's a conversation, and usually it's that conversation with that one example. And I hate to say it, sometimes the threat actors are the best business development because a peer of that CEO hears about what they're going through, and he does not, for all the right reasons, does not want to go through that himself. And you start saying, well, there's a tool you can use. It's not a panacea. There's a tool you can use, and it's the intelligence that you can put into your security tools, you can put into your process, you can talk to your risk management people so they know what they can do maybe to mitigate the enterprise risk better. So thanks for that question. We'll start to kind of drill down into this. Whatever the intelligence is, again, whether it's information that you've devised yourself, you use a peer, there's some good sharing relationships within industry sectors or just within the community at large, the information you can use. And we kind of touched on this. These are just kind of big silos where you can make a difference with the intelligence and actually what they do. With governance, and I mentioned risk, to help understand what the risk is to the enterprise, patch management. Companies are becoming more mobile, and bring your own device. Bring your own device is a wonderful thing if you're the end user, and it can potentially be a nightmare if you're the network security guys and the enterprise security team that has to try to accommodate all those devices. So being able to prioritize, and sometimes you see companies who say, it's BYOD, but, and maybe either there's a platform or there's some circumstances where they don't think they really have their arms around how to protect themselves, and you impose the caveat, you impose the but by having good intelligence to say, if you bring in this particular device into the network, there's just some really fundamental flaws here in the architecture and the way the software runs that we're just not ready to defend against with our security stack. So we're going to have to hold off on it. You make an intelligent business decision so that you can deploy 5 out of the 7 device families that you want to. Business continues, productivity climbs, but you kind of fence those 2 until you've got a policy or you've got a workaround or you've worked with that vendor to have a higher level of confidence that tool's safe. Surface protection, if you just look at the edges, whether it's endpoint protection, whether it's looking out a little further about public-facing parts of the enterprise, you can again put in awareness and use the intelligence to know what you need to defend yourself against or what your concerns are. SIM, Security Information Event Management, SOCs, usually whatever platform or set of tools that the SOC team uses to event prioritization. Again, I keep saying it shrinks the problem. You got 1,000 events, but you have 20 that correlate to one of your intelligence sources or from your indications, a compromised database that you get through your community, through a vendor, through sharing. So you look at those 10 events first. One of those 10 events, we've got a problem here. We've got some lateral movement in the network that really these 2 families shouldn't be talking to each other. So you call an incident. The incident response team can begin to look at the indicators. Maybe they see a call out to a command and control node. your intelligence team, your intelligence source can then say, okay, we can track that command and control node down. It's been used routinely in electronic crime. We've seen it used in the past in this way. A particular group uses it, and when they use it, they tend to do this in the process of a breach. Then you help steer the forensics team into what to look for within the network. As they find more in the network, they pass that back to the intelligence team. You could kind of think of it bifurcated, that the forensics team is looking inside your enterprise, and the intelligence team is looking out to really see who it was, why they were in the network, what they may have exfiltrated or attempt to exfiltrate. So you work together across those teams. So I kind of touched on forensics and the investigations there on the end. Okay. This is just hypothetical, but there's a lot of intelligence and a lot of reporting that you can provide to the company, and it starts to raise the consciousness of the leadership, and they're more comfortable with the decisions they make. They're also more comfortable when you have that discussion about, we need another security tool, and it's going to cost X million dollars, and here's what it's going to do. When you make that ask, and you say, because there's a group out here, or a community of electronic criminals, espionage actors, hacktivists, that have used these vulnerabilities or used these gaps in an enterprise defense to, you can almost just keep adding zeros to the financial damage that can be resulting from it. This is why we need the tool. I'm completely against FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. That's not good business practice under any circumstance. But when you can explain to them, this actually happened, this group does it, here's the tools they use, this is why we need this product or this process, or we need to expand the manpower in this area, then it makes your business case for you. But without that, it's like, well, this is bright and shiny, or, oh, I went by the CIO went by that booth last week and he really thinks it's a great idea. It's like, that's not the way to have good policy and to make sure your network's secure. But to that point, first thing you'll see with the Intel team is what I call media counterpoints. Is somebody heard something on the news, and this is to kind of put it in perspective about how it affects our enterprise. It could be one item, it could be an email you just kind of knock out, it could be 2 minutes of reporting if you have a conference call within certain teams, and kind of put things back into perspective. That's always good. And again, to one of the earlier questions, that will almost always start the dialogue with the leadership of the company is, well, we're still concerned about hacktivists, or we're concerned about, because we're a global sponsor of X event, and we'll be in this particular country, and this particular country seems to suffer a lot from hacktivist attacks or whatever it may be. What do we need to do about that? When we deploy for that business opportunity or for that sponsorship opportunity, are there any concerns we should be aware of? That's an intelligence request. The intelligence team goes to work. And again, when you bring that back to the leadership and the risk management team, they can make smarter business decisions. If you have a good intelligence program and a good intelligence team, the company actually will, I don't want to say take bigger risk, but the company can take risk with more confidence. You've kind of pushed some of the noise away and clearly told them this is what we're going to be facing from a cyber security concern if we roll out this new product, go into this market, go into a partnership in this particular country. It makes a big difference. The chief risk officer will become your best friend. She will appreciate what you're bringing to the table for the enterprise. And again, I know, speaking to an IT security community here, every enterprise, this is a facet of what they do. No matter what product they make, a simplistic example would be a manufacturing company makes widgets, but obviously there's industrial control systems, there's connectivity, there's supply chain through SAP and otherwise. It's still, that could be intellectual property, it could be information that could be monetized, it could be just a hacktivist group impacting your ability to produce your product and get it out onto the market. So any enterprise has a concern, and any enterprise can benefit from the intelligence. Threat intelligence briefings, those should be again, you've had conversations with the leadership of the company, you've had conversations with the risk officer, and they say it keeps us up to night about a hacktivist group attacking our brand. Then every time you're aware of that group or what tools they may have, you can keep them up to date on what that threat actor group is doing, and you can take proper security measures. Threat reports, those tend to be the company is thinking about opening. Part of this conglomerate is going to maybe go into finance and go into banking. Well, then you kind of give them a tutorial on what electronic crime is all about, what that means, what threats you're going to face. So those are more long-term looking. A warning is one of your peer banks got an attack last week, and you're kind of desensitizing the company to the fact that something could happen, so make sure your security posture is up to date. An alert, we're seeing something on the network. The SOC says we're seeing something on the network and we think it's potentially a breach, whatever it may be. And so that's when you push that information out that you have on that group out to the rest of the company. Threat scenarios, that's something you'll work a lot with the chief risk officer. We're this kind of business. What are the threat scenarios that we really need to be concerned about? Like I say, if you're a U.S. domestic company and you produce and ship in the Midwest, probably you don't have to have concerns about certain threat actor categories, but others are absolutely fundamental that you need to protect against your business. So those go through quarterly. Threat scenarios also is a good time. That's usually when the conversation gets started with the business leaders and the leadership of the company. Is they can get their heads around that. A hacktivist group from this area doesn't like the fact that we use genetically modified materials in our products. Well, you kind of explain how would they protest against us, or what would they attempt to do to impact our business. It gives them something they can kind of really sink their teeth into. Sensor enrichment, that's ongoing. Again, we have an indication of compromise, of an IP address that's used by this threat actor group. Is our sensor stack up to date? Do we need to write a new signature? Are there some more information we need to go back to one of our security partners? Metrics, again, everybody has to have metrics, understandably so. What the expression is, you watch what you can measure and you can respond to what you can measure. So those are not how many events the SOC registered in the last 24 hours, but we had 3 events from the SOC in the last 24 hours, and all 3 seem to be a result of a phishing campaign that was targeted against our industry sector, not our company, but our industry sector. And so then the intel team would look at how that was executed, what lures they used, what attachments they used. Is there anything we need to, if you look at the attachment that was used and what vulnerability they were trying to exploit, and you have the conversation with the patching team on what gets patched next. And support just across the company. Brand protection. Obviously, the value of brands equals or sometimes exceeds the value of the product that a company produces. Incident response, as we mentioned earlier, you have a breach. You have a forensics team inside. You've called law enforcement. You're going to have to really pull out all the stops and deal with this. The intel team supports that. Fraud, more and more, not surprisingly, has cyber dimension, and usually the fraud is executed logically and electronically. So you'll find yourself working more with the fraud team, who maybe have a very strong, using banking for an example, have a very strong background on physical fraud or physical losses within the bank. And you see more and more it's easier and quicker to steal electronically than it is physically. So you'll partner with them a lot more on actually how fraud is taking place in the company. I mentioned attack surface management, new product. We're thinking about coming out with a new product. Whatever it may be, what would be the impact on our supply chain? What would be the impact if we sell it through e-commerce? Is there a dimension there? We've never really done e-commerce. What does that expose us to? And emerging technologies that the company may use or may be looking to invest in, and physical security. Again, physical security concerns on a facility, maybe a board of directors meeting, and they're concerned about the physical threat, and you become aware of a hacktivist group that says, oh, we found out that the board of directors is meeting next week. We think we'll protest out front or we'll take some other action. Physical security team might not be aware of that, might not be looking in the same place that your cyber team is as far as being aware of that threat. So you support the physical team. Again, from a matrix point of view, this is just a graphic to kind of, again, you have all these conversations and the executives and all the company is going through hundreds of emails a day, and you've mentioned the Qassam cyber fighters a month ago, and the executive, he doesn't remember who the heck the Qassam cyber fighters are this week, understandably so. So what we would do is try to give a way to articulate the threat. If this is your weekly threat report to the leadership of the company, how do you frame it for them? You know, report number 1 is on a hacktivist campaign, and report number 2 is IP theft. Obviously, there's a paragraph that they read along with this, but this puts it in perspective. The hacktivist campaign is focused on our company, so pay attention, guys. And the group, we've identified the group as being competent. They can do to a degree what they say they can do. That becomes a priority, that becomes a discussion, that becomes a concern to the company. Then you look at the IP theft. Maybe it was an event in the industry. Okay, we need to be aware of this down the road, the next planning cycle, the next meeting next month with the chief risk officer on risk. We need to make sure this is one of the agenda items to look at potential loss in our industry. Again, it was a competent group. For some reason, they haven't turned their attention to us or to our business sector, but it's potential to do so. Questions, comments, observations? Okay, this simple as that. This is how this whole thing comes together. I won't go into all the detail, but everything we've just talked about kind of rolls into this is how the intelligence that you have within your enterprise or that you use as a resource flows and supports the company. Again, I'm going to stand under here, so forgive me here. Easily within an enterprise, if you're the intelligence team or you're working to draw in intelligence, easily you could have 60 to 70 sources. Again, a source could be working with somebody at CyLab. They have an area of expertise, and you want to draw on that to have a conversation to make yourself more conversant in that area. Data feeds, again, that could be just community sharing. That could be a vendor that gives you indications of compromise at a basic level. Again, you want to add context to that, but it's still data that you can use. Public-private sharing. I mentioned one that always comes to mind is FSISAC, Financial Services Information Sharing and Analysis Center. There's ISACs for all the 17 critical infrastructure areas in the U.S. Those are a good, almost free resource because it's like industries. You're talking to the same group within the IT community that's concerned about threats and have their head around intelligence, and you can draw a lot of information from those. There are vendors that offer similar sharing models. You know, those can be examined if that's appropriate, but sharing models certainly bring a lot of good tactical information into your enterprise. Internal subject matter experts. Again, we were talking about you're conversant on the Qassam cyber fighters. You know how they operate. You know what they do. You're kind of new to the company. Gee, I'm not really sure, do we have much of a web presence? Do we have really a lot of exposure globally that they could take advantage of? Find out whoever owns that part of your enterprise and owns that part of the business and draw on their expertise. Reputable web sources. You know, there are certainly subject matter experts out there who have information that they share, or at least you can draw on as well. Social media indications and warning. I always make that distinction in that cyber threat intelligence is not social media monitoring for brand or customer sentiment. Do they like the new toaster we made or not is not cyber threat intelligence. A group who says, we want to, it's probably in the dark web, but you see a group saying, well, we're really impressed with the technology behind this toaster. We want to try to take advantage of that and lever it to our benefit. That's the group that you're concerned about from a threat intelligence point of view, not that they like a particular product that you're putting out. The workbench is just a place where all these sources can come together and be normalized, and you can draw your information from there. Again, goes into your sensor stack. From NetFlow, proxies, DLP, apps, firewalls, inline malware analysis, intrusion detection, and then whatever sensors you may have in your stack. A good example is maybe with inline malware analysis, you get an alert or you get in the sandbox, you get some malware that detonates. That's good. You maybe do a hash of it so you can clearly identify what it is precisely, but why was it in our network? Where was it found? Why does that mean anything to us? Good, you've caught it. It's not gone anywhere else, but what do you do with that information? And again, that's where the intelligence surrounding this lets you make a business decision and make a better security decision. Again, the SOC, all that information flows into the SOC, so they have situational awareness. Good programs, when you have all the intelligence flowing across this, the SOC has an event. They see some indications, some intelligence associated with that event. They call the incident response team. They declare an incident. All the intelligence that's already been collected goes to the incident response team. So when they open the ticket or open the file or start their case management, they've got the malware sample. They may have the history of its variant. They have the threat actor group or groups that have used this in the past. They have the techniques that they normally use to infiltrate a network in an enterprise. That intelligence has told them where to look in your enterprise. Where most likely was this breach perpetrated, and where should we respond to it? Again, that's the ticketing system. I mentioned the incident response team. And sharing, that's very important. You've had a breach. You may not want to give the details, all the gory details to everybody, but you can sanitize a portion of that. Maybe it's the malware, maybe it's where it infiltrated, whatever it may be, and share that with the community, because not surprisingly, you're probably not the only victim or potential victim, and this is probably not the only time this tool is going to be used against someone in your industry or just someone in the community at large. So the sharing is a very important part of this process. This is the big slide. This is the big hand over the map. So this is a good place if anybody has questions or even something we've talked about before or a comment that's come up. This is a good time to bring that up. Yes, ma'am.
Do you have tips on how you measure the impact and the value add to a cyber intelligence program?
Good. That leads back to the question that was earlier on that. I've not found good metrics yet. I'll confess that. I think in general in the community, kind of good security metrics are still developing, and that's from my point of view. Some of the metrics you can use is time to decision, if for lack of a better description of that, is the SOC gets an indication. 500 alerts, events come in, and they can prioritize 5 that have some correlations with some other information that they have here within the enterprise. And we say, one of them we need to turn over to the incident response team. This may be an incident. It's their decision. These other 4, well, they got through because we haven't enriched our sensor stack, haven't updated our signatures at the frequency that we should have. So kind of time to action. It's not a positive metric, but it's a metric is because the intelligence flowing in, how many signatures have we had to write? How many regular expressions have we written to help either track something down within the network or prevent something from coming into the network through the proxy or wherever it may be? So that's another indication. Just the dialogue that you'll get with the executives on this very topic. or when you make a business case for a new sensor tool or some training or another resource, that the intelligence is part of that business case, the groups that you've seen react differently. Those are maybe a couple of examples. I'm talked out on that one. So. Other questions? Comments? Observations? We doing okay on time? Good, good, okay. Certainly appreciate everybody's time today. Certainly the questions. If there's anything that you want to speak to me afterwards, I'll be more than glad to entertain those as well. And again, thank you very much.